Grandma Rachel's Ghosts, a Jewish fantasy story by Jonathan Dunsky. Read for you by Dallin, Bradford. Dedication. For Grandma Rachel, thank you for the rugelach, and for everything else. 1. Now. Mother is waiting in the hall, and I can see she has been crying. She sees me approach and rises from the plastic chair by the door. She's acting crazy again, Mother says, shouting about Esther and Tova and Yitzchak, saying dreadful things, telling me I'm blind. The lines around her eyes are more pronounced, as if being in this home of the elderly is aging her. What am I going to do about her? She asks. I take her hands, the hands that have bathed me, changed me, dressed me, gave me food and warmth and education. These hands are now smaller than mine. My palms easily engulf hers. It will be all right, I say, and the lie flows so easily that I'm scared by it. She's been asking for you, wondering where you are. I nod, my head heavy with tiredness. I came straight from the airport and the jet lag is weighing on me. I guide Mother back to the chair and ask her to wait for me. I enter Grandma Rachel's room. The acrid scents of medication, antiseptic material, and old age sting my nostrils. A nurse stands by Grandma Rachel's bed, adjusting her IV. Grandma looks tiny. She seems to have shrunken both in height and weight. Her hair is sparse, and her clothes hang on her scrawny frame. "Jacob," Grandma Rachel whispers, "you're here, finally. They think I'm crazy, that I'm imagining things. My own sisters. Tell them." I am silent. The nurse gives me a nod of familiarity. Wordlessly, she's telling me that it's okay, that she knows what I'm going through. I realize the nurse thinks Grandma is delusional, that her mind has deteriorated to the point where she sees apparitions. I want to speak, want to shout out the truth. The shame builds up inside and pushes the truth against the closed gate of my mouth. In the end, I simply tell the nurse that I'll take over. The nurse nods. I've given her a sedative. She'll fall asleep soon. I thank her and sit by Grandma Rachel's bed. Her eyes are closed, and her breath is slow and even. She's on the verge of sleep. On the other side stand Tova and Esther in their long dresses of brown wool. I can see them both, frowning at me. 2. Then. The first time I saw Grandma Rachel chatting with her sisters, I didn't know who they were. I remember finding it strange that two women were walking around in the blistering July heat of Tel Aviv wearing long-sleeved, coarse wool dresses whose hems caressed the floor. I was sitting cross-legged on the cool kitchen tiles, clad only in shorts, sucking a lemon popsicle, and I was still hot. Grandma was hunched over the kitchen table, her graying hair rolled into a tight bun, fingers curling dough into crescent-shaped rugelach. The scent of cinnamon, sugar, and fresh flour permeated the kitchen. To my 5-year-old nose, there was nothing more intoxicating than that smell. Like a pianist playing a concerto to perfection, Grandma Rachel would work on her rugelach. It was her art form. She never consulted a recipe or used a measuring cup. She added sugar and cinnamon and raisins and sour cream by feel only, and the final pastries always tasted sublime. Although Grandma's rugelach were a source of pleasure for me, they were a constant cause of frustration for my mother. No matter how many times she attempted to replicate Grandma's masterpieces, she always fell short. They would spend hours in Grandma's small kitchen, creating one batch after the other, working side by side, Grandma giving the instructions in Yiddish, Mother asking her questions in Hebrew. I could always tell which rugelach were Grandma's. Those I devoured. And which were Mother's. Those she would take to her colleagues at work the next day. That day in July, as I sat with my hands sticky with melted popsicle and my mouth filled with an artificial lemony flavor, I watched intently as Grandma pulled a completed batch of rugelach out of her oven, set it on the counter to cool, and resumed work on another. The two strange women with the long dresses were also watching her. The woman on Grandma's left looked like the picture of Grandma from when she was younger, the one that stood on her piano. She had brown hair and eyes that matched, a wide face, and lips that were firmly pressed. The woman wrinkled her nose as Grandma poured syrup over the dough. "What are you doing, Rachel? You forgot to add the cinnamon. Where's your head?" The woman on Grandma's right nodded, her black ponytail bobbing up and down, her eyebrows pinched in worry. "It's also too much syrup. It will end up too sweet." She turned to the woman on Grandma's left. "This isn't the way Mother used to make them, is it, Tova?" "The boy likes them sweet," Grandma Rachel said, sprinkling cinnamon on the dough. "And I don't remember you liking Mother's cooking all that much, Esther." "The boy has a yellow mouth and walks around half naked," Tova said. Grandma grabbed a wet cloth and wiped my hands and mouth clean, kissed me on the forehead, and tousled my hair. "He's 5, and this is how they do it here. In this heat, I wouldn't mind walking around half naked either." She blushed as she said this and then laughed. Tova and Esther laughed too. So it continued, the two women hovering around Grandma Rachel, watching over her as she baked, offering tips and advice, bemoaning every mistake they perceived she made. Despite their thorny criticism, Grandma Rachel never got angry or impatient. She seemed to relish every protest, every dig at her skills. Throughout that day, whenever Tova and Esther corrected her cleaning methods, sewing abilities, or the way she looked after me, she responded with a smile or a laugh. This went on until Mother picked me up after work. 3. Now. The doctor informs me Grandma Rachel is dying. I don't tell him that I can see this for myself. He says that he's sorry they need to keep her sedated so much. There's no choice. There's too much pain. In addition, he says, she keeps seeing things, talking to people from her past, her sisters, apparently. Mother told him this. Mother, who has always been blind, by nature or choice. It's not easy to see a family member suffer dementia to the point where they can't tell what's real and unreal, he tells me. His tone is soft, controlled. He has done this before. He tells me they will do what they can to make sure that Grandma suffers as little as possible. I don't tell him that given the choice, she wouldn't have minded a little suffering. It would have made her feel less guilty. 4. Then. The plate shattered on the floor, shrapnel flying. Grandma Rachel picked me up and set me in a chair before leaving the room. She returned with a broom and pan and swept the pieces away. Her hands were shaking. A moment before she had been washing dishes. Then I asked her why Esther had been crying earlier. Grandma Rachel gave me a look that I had never seen before. Her eyes were probing me, appraising. Esther and Tova were not around, but earlier that day they had spoken while I played on the balcony, and I heard sobbing. I crept to the kitchen doorway and saw the three of them huddled, heads bowed. Tova had her arms around Esther's shoulders, consoling her as she wept. "What do you know about Esther?" Grandma asked. I shrugged. "That she's pretty and has eyes like Mother and that she's taller than Tova and you." "You see Tova as well?" I nodded. The question seemed strange. How could I not see them when they all stood next to each other? Grandma pulled up a chair and sat close to me. She leaned forward so our eyes were at the same level. "Esther was sad because she was thinking about her baby, Yitzhak." "Esther has a baby? Why doesn't she ever bring him with her?" Grandma gave me a smile. It was a sad sort of smile. She pulled me up into her lap and held me close to her bosom. I felt her heat and smelled honey on her breath and heard her heart drumming inside her. It's a long story, not fit for little boys. I was used to such answers from my mother, but I tried another question. Grandma, why do Tova and Esther wear such long, heavy dresses? Grandma was silent for a moment. Then she said, Because where they are, it is very, very cold. 5. Now. Mother has a breakdown. She sits on the couch, crying, shivering all over. I hold her in my arms as she sobs. She is racked with guilt. She always wanted to tell me, she says, about Esther and Tova and the rest of them. I never wanted to listen. I couldn't stand the thought of it, all that pain. It made me feel hopeless. I didn't want to know. I hold her and whisper calming words in her ears. I don't reveal that I was the same as her, and that I can still be different. 6. Then. Under the covers in my room, in the evening of the day Grandma Rachel told me about Yitzhak, I waited for Mother to pick out a story to read to me. I smelled cigarette smoke as she flipped a book open. Her hair was tied in a ponytail with errant strands tucked behind her ears. She was about to start reading when I asked her what had happened to Yitzhak. Yitzhak who? She asked. Esther's baby. Mother closed the book with a snap. She laid it on her knees with both hands flat on the cover. Who told you about Esther? Grandma Rachel, I said. Mother leaned back in her chair, pursing her lips as she did when I had made a mess with my food or forgot to tidy up my toys. She tapped her fingers on the book cover a few times and seemed to make a decision. It's not a good story right before bed. Let's finish our book. 7. Now. I sit by Grandma Rachel's bed, watching her sleep. Tova doesn't want to talk to me. Esther begs me to get the doctor to stop the medication. She and Tova want to speak with Grandma before she passes. I whisper back in Yiddish that it's for the pain and that I couldn't convince the doctor even if I tried. The truth is that I'm afraid of what he'll think of me if he senses the truth. 8. Then. Mother's raised voice woke me. She was talking on the phone, her tone harsh, a staccato of sharp words. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the doorway. I stood against the jamb, my bare feet tingling with the chill of the floor tiles. I dared not walk any closer to the living room where Mother was. Fragments of one-sided conversation wafted to me. He's too young. Why dredge things up? I don't want to hear about it. Keep him out of it or I won't let you watch over him. I understood very little, and when I heard her hanging up, I hurried back into bed. 9. Now. Tova decides to punish me. She stands next to my chair and assaults me with the details. The soldiers breaking into their home, the beating, Esther clinging to Yitzhak as she trips in the snow, the soldiers laughing, the march in the cold, and the squalor, stench, and suffocation of the ghetto. My heart hammers and my stomach clenches as Tova pounds me with their torment. I try to sit through it, keeping my head bowed. I can't stand it for long and flee from Grandma Rachel's room. 10. Then. Grandma Rachel was rolling dough with a wooden roller. I could see the muscles twitch in her meaty forearms. Tova and Esther clustered nearby. Jacob, you can't tell your mother about Esther and Tova, Grandma said. Why? She wouldn't understand. And she doesn't want to know, Tova added. Grandma gestured for her to hush. She set down the roller, rinsed the flour off her hands, wiped them on her apron, and turned to me. "You believe in ghosts, Jacob?" I nodded. I'd heard all about ghosts. Sometimes they were scary, but other times they were friendly and helpful. "Well, your mother doesn't." I knew this, too. Whenever I told Mother I thought some magical creature had infiltrated my room, she laughed and told me they didn't really exist. Grandma paused for a moment. "You want to know why Esther and Tova wear long dresses, even in summer?" I nodded. "Well, you know that I was born in Poland, and that in Poland it is not like here, with so much sun and heat. In Poland there is snow and ice and rain, and it is cold, sometimes very cold. Tova and Esther, they were my sisters, and we all grew up together in Poland." "I practically raised your grandma," Tova said. "And Esther, too." "Quiet, Tova," Esther said. "Let Rachel talk." "But now they're here," I said. "They're here and not here," Grandma said. "A part of them is here in this room right now, but another part is still there, where it's cold." I didn't understand, and Grandma must have seen this on my face. "Tova and Esther are ghosts, Jacob. The kind your mother doesn't believe in, the kind she cannot see. For a long time I thought I was the only one who could see them. Then I discovered that you could too." "But why can't Mother see them?" "I don't know. I was surprised when I found out you could." "Grandma, if Tova and Esther are ghosts, it means that they're dead, doesn't it?" Grandma sighed. "Yes." "How did they die?" Grandma looked toward her sisters and didn't answer. Tova and Esther glanced at each other. A tear slipped out of Esther's eye, running down her cheek. Tova lowered her head, wringing her hands. "That was a long time ago, Jacob. What's important is that they're here now." I had more questions about what had happened to Tova and Esther, but I remembered the conversation Mother had had with Grandma the previous night. I could ask about other things, though. "In stories, ghosts have a reason for being there," I said. "Why are Esther and Tova here?" "So Rachel would know everything that happened," Esther said. "To keep an eye on her," Tova said. "To help me be less lonely," Grandma said. 11. Now. Grandma is lonely now. Lonely and more alone than she has ever been. More alone than when the news of the obliteration of entire communities traveled from Europe on the battered ships with the few survivors that squeezed into them, heading for an old new land and a chance at regeneration. More alone than when she realized that her family had been wiped out. Before, she always had Tova and Esther to talk to remember with. Now she is alone in her medication-induced stupor. Her breath is labored and irregular, her sleep chaotic even with the drugs, her eyes and mouth twitching with dreams or pain, or both. I can do nothing. I've been doing exactly that for a long time. 12. Then. I grew up in a family of women. There were the live ones, Mother and Grandma Rachel, and there were the dead ones, Esther and Tova. I understood a smattering of Yiddish due to being left in Grandma's care as a toddler. With Tova and Esther to speak with, I mastered it and Polish as well. I could speak both as fluently as Hebrew. I kept this a secret from Mother. Esther and Tova wanted to tell me stories about the war, the hardship and horror, but Grandma Rachel forbade it. I was too young, she said, although I knew it was because of Mother that I was deprived of this history. So Tova and Esther kept their stories light, painting a pretty picture of Poland, The town they had grown up in, the family that once included dozens of cousins and uncles and aunts. As a child, I couldn't get enough of their stories. Their Poland seemed like a fairyland, a place and time my imagination struggled to absorb. When I turned 12, I surpassed Grandma in height. My tastes changed, but her rugelach remained my favorite food. Otherwise, I distanced myself from Grandma Rachel. I no longer spent summer days with her and her sisters, but roamed outside with friends who didn't see ghosts. As I grew older, I saw less and less of Grandma Rachel. She began sending over boxes of rugelach with my mother. She never complained or asked me to visit her. When I did see her, I noticed how old she'd become. Stooped, thinner, with thick eyeglasses and an earpiece. Esther and Tova, their ages never shifting, were furious with me. "You need to come here more often," Esther said. "Why do you leave her alone like this?" Tova asked. "I have things to do," I said, "and she's not alone, she has you too." Tova clenched her fists, looking ready to smack me, but I knew she couldn't touch me. Ghosts have their limits. Esther simply looked pained. "It's not the same thing, Jacob," Esther said. "We are merely her past. You're her future. She needs you around." I had more important things to do. Girls and soccer and sunbathing on Frischmann Beach. I grew weary of talk about the synagogue in Poland and ice skating and working in my great-grandfather's tannery. When I was 15, Tova decided to torment me. During dinner with Mother and Grandma Rachel, she stood by the table recounting the names of their parents and uncles and aunts and cousins. She told me how each of them had died, who by a bullet and who in the camps, who from exposure and who of starvation. Esther pleaded with her to stop, but Tova would have none of it. Mother was oblivious to Tova's harrowing litany, but Grandma Rachel wasn't. She sat with her eyes squeezed shut, her right hand supporting her head, shaking. Finally, she shot up from her chair and shouted, "Stop it, Tova!" Mother gasped, staring wide-eyed at Grandma, who sank back into her chair, looking depleted. Mother began to say something, but Grandma shushed her. Shortly after, Grandma handed a tray of rugelach to me and asked us to leave. She had always wanted us to stay longer. Later, in the car on the ride home, Mother told me that she thought Grandma was losing it. I said nothing. I quickly washed my mind clean of Tova's horrific words. I wanted nothing to do with that past. I wanted to be free of it. 13. Now. Mother sits by Grandma's bed constantly now. The doctor has told us that she may die at any moment. Esther and Tova stand like sentries by her side, holding hands. I look at them and wonder whether those long dresses were the clothes in which they died, or just a memory of Grandma Rachel's. I've always been afraid to ask. They have grown hazy over the past few days, their forms less solid. I realize that I stand to lose 3 family members all at once. 14. Then. I went away to study abroad. I tried to forget who I was. I looked to the future. I sent the rare letter and called on occasion. Mother would tell me the news and how Grandma was doing in her new home. Mother said that Grandma's memory was going and that she suffered from delusional episodes. She keeps talking to Esther and Tova, yelling at me when I don't see them. She told me during one of my infrequent phone calls. She makes things up, things she can't know about the atrocities. She wasn't there, but she says she knows. Tova and Esther told her, she says. I remained silent. 15. Now. Mother is weeping on my shoulder as we stand by the fresh grave. The scent of newly turned earth and flowers floats in the breeze. No more rugelach, I think. Later, in my mother's apartment, she surprises me with an album of old pictures I have never seen before. In one picture, Grandma Rachel, Tova, and Esther are smiling against a backdrop of snow. A small dog is lying at their feet. A date is scrawled on the back. 1933. The same year Grandma got on a boat and left for a land of prayers. Mother is clutching a tissue, sobbing incessantly. "I never wanted to know," she says, flipping through the album. "She always wanted to tell me about what life was like, but I always feared the stories." In the early evening, Mother grows exhausted by her tears, and I put her to bed. I go to my childhood room. The artifacts of my teen years beckon from the walls and shelves. I wonder why I ever found them important. I lie on the bed, and only then do the tears come. I cry silently and uncontrollably. I fall asleep. I dream of childhood days in Grandma Rachel's kitchen with Esther's smiles and Tova's warm hectoring. I dream of rugelach, hot and crispy, sweet and spicy. I wake up with a jolt, the scent of pastries still around me. It is the beginning of the day. I open my eyes and sit up. They are there. Tova and Esther and Grandma Rachel. Their shapes are clear. They're all young, like in their picture. Tova is nodding approvingly. Esther has tears in her eyes, and Grandma Rachel is smiling. I see how beautiful she is. "I am ready," I say. "Tell me everything." At times, I wonder if I have imagined it all. The birth of my son lays those doubts to rest. As I stand by his crib one spring night, with the scent of the rugelach I've baked wafting from the kitchen, I see Grandma Rachel leaning over the baby, making a face at him, whispering endearments. My son giggles and reaches his pudgy fingers toward her. This has been Grandma Rachel's Ghosts, a Jewish fantasy story by Jonathan Dunsky. Read for you by Dallin Bradford. Copyright 2016 by Jonathan Dunsky. Production copyright 2022 by Jonathan Dunsky. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are the creation of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, business establishments, events, or locales is entirely coincidental.